Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The three moons of Epsilon Ridge cast their perpetual twilight across the crystalline forests, turning every shadow into a potential death trap. Norah crouched behind a cluster of luminescent fungi, watching the pack of juvenile Ravenclaw stalkers play in the clearing ahead. 6 months of xenobiology training at the academy, and here she was, alone on her first solo research expedition, documenting creatures that could tear through reinforced steel with their claws. "Just cubs," she whispered into her recorder, trying to convince herself as much as document her findings. Approximately 8 months old, based on their size and the development of their bioluminescent marking patterns. The cubs were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Each one stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, their midnight black fur rippling with veins of electric blue that pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats. Their eyes, all 6 of them per head, tracked movement with predatory precision that made Norah's skin crawl. Evolution had crafted these creatures to be perfect killing machines, and even the babies looked like they could hunt down a grown human without breaking stride. One of the cubs, slightly smaller than the others, padded closer to her hiding spot. Its head tilted with curiosity, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. Norah held her breath, mentally reviewing every protocol about stalker encounters. Rule 1, don't run. Rule 2, don't make eye contact. Rule 3, pray they're not hungry. The cub's marking patterns shifted from blue to a soft golden hue. Norah blinked in surprise. That color pattern wasn't in any of the research databases. She reached for her scanner, fingers trembling slightly as she activated the device. The soft beeping sound made the cub's ears twitch. All 6 eyes fixed on her position. "Oh, wonderful," Norah muttered. "So much for stealth." The other cubs looked up from their play, their own marking patterns shifting through a spectrum of colors. They approached slowly, their movements fluid and silent despite their size. Norah found herself surrounded by a semicircle of apex predators who probably viewed her as either a new toy or their next meal. She remained perfectly still as the lead cub sniffed around her hiding spot, its breath hot against her face through the gaps in the fungi. This close, she could see the intelligence in those alien eyes. Not just animal cunning, but something deeper. Something that suggested these creatures were far more complex than the research suggested. The cub made a sound, somewhere between a purr and a growl. The others responded with similar vocalizations, their heads bobbing in what almost looked like communication. "Impossible," Norah breathed. The academic consensus was clear. Ravenclaw stalkers were highly intelligent predators, but they didn't possess language capabilities. She reached for her sample collection kit, moving slowly to avoid startling them. The protocol required blood samples for genetic analysis, and these cubs seemed calm enough. She prepared the microneedle, designed to take a sample so small the subject wouldn't even notice. The device pricked her finger instead of theirs. "Damn!" she hissed, watching a drop of crimson blood well up on her fingertip. The reaction was instantaneous. Every cub froze, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in rapid, synchronized bursts. The air filled with a low, thrumming sound that seemed to come from deep within their chests. Their body language shifted from curious to something else entirely. Fear. These apex predators, creatures that could hunt down anything on this planet, were afraid. Of her blood. The smallest cub, the one that had approached first, backed away slowly. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of crystalline teeth, and it spoke in heavily accented but unmistakable standard. "That's Apex." Norah's blood turned to ice. Her sample collection kit clattered to the ground as her hands began to shake. The academic world would lose its collective mind. Stalkers could speak. They could communicate in human languages. And somehow, her blood had triggered a fear response that was clearly learned, not instinctual. The cubs continued backing away, their golden markings now pulsing with deep red warnings. One of them, slightly larger than the others, made a series of clicking sounds that the others seemed to understand. They began to retreat toward the forest edge, but their eyes never left her. "Wait!" Norah called out, finding her voice despite the shock. "Please, I won't hurt you." The largest cub paused, its head tilting in that same curious gesture. When it spoke, its voice was higher, more childlike than the first. "Apex walkers, bring the long dark. Grandmother's memories say truth." Grandmother's memories? Norah struggled to process what she was hearing. You mean genetic memory? Inherited experiences? But the cubs were already disappearing into the shadows of the crystal forest, their forms blending with the perpetual twilight until only the fading glow of their markings remained visible. Norah sat back on her heels, staring at the spot where they'd vanished. Her equipment lay scattered around her, forgotten in the face of this revelation. She looked down at her finger, where a tiny drop of blood still clung to the skin. Somehow, that single drop had identified her as something these creatures called Apex. She pulled out her emergency communicator, then stopped. What would she tell the research station? That the cubs could speak? That they seemed to have cultural memory of humans? That they'd called her Apex and fled in apparent terror? The academic review board would think she'd suffered some kind of psychological break. Hallucinations brought on by isolation and stress. She needed more evidence, more data. She needed to understand what Apex walkers meant, and why the sight of human blood had triggered what appeared to be an ancient, inherited fear. The forest around her had grown quiet, the usual sounds of alien wildlife replaced by an unsettling silence. Norah gathered her equipment, her mind racing through possibilities. If the Stalkers possessed language and cultural memory, everything humanity thought it knew about this species was wrong. More concerning was the implication of their reaction. The cubs hadn't just been afraid, they'd been respectful, cautious in the way one predator acknowledged another. As she stood to leave, a branch snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing. Then another. The sounds were too heavy, too deliberate to be the cubs returning. Something much larger was moving through the forest, something that made the crystalline trees creak under its weight. Norah's blood ran cold as she realized the cubs' fear might not have been about her specifically. It might have been about what their distress calls would attract. The adult stalkers were coming. The sound of splintering crystal echoed through the forest as something massive moved between the trees. Norah pressed herself against the largest fungus cluster she could find, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. The cubs had been terrifying enough, but they were babies compared to what was approaching. Adult Ravenclaw stalkers could grow to the size of ancient earth tigers, with claws that could shred starship hull plating and jaws powerful enough to crush reinforced bone. The research files were filled with incident reports from the early colonial days, back when humans still thought they could tame this world through superior firepower and stubborn determination. Those reports made for grim reading. A low rumble rolled across the clearing, felt more than heard. The bioluminescent fungi around Norah began to pulse in response, their usual soft glow shifting to warning patterns of deep red and orange. Even the plant life on this world had learned to fear the stalkers. Through the gaps in her hiding spot, Norah caught her first glimpse of the pack approaching. Three massive forms moved with liquid grace between the crystal trees, their marking patterns painting the forest in shifting waves of light. The lead stalker was enormous, its scarred hide telling stories of countless battles for dominance. Old wounds crisscrossed its flank, and one of its secondary eyes was milky white with blindness. This was a veteran, a survivor who'd earned his position through violence and cunning. The scarred stalker raised its head, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. Its remaining 5 eyes swept the clearing with methodical precision. When its gaze passed over her hiding spot, Norah felt like prey being evaluated by death itself. The other 2 stalkers spread out, their movements coordinated with military precision. One was sleeker, younger, its markings bright and unblemished. The other bore the heavy build of a seasoned hunter, its claws leaving deep gouges in the crystalline ground with each step. "The cubs called," the scarred leader said, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. "They spoke of apex walkers." Norah's breath caught. Not only could they speak, but they were discussing her like she was some kind of legendary creature. The younger stalker made a dismissive sound, somewhere between a snort and a growl. "Cubs see shadows and call them monsters," it said. "There are no apex walkers here, only soft meat that bleeds." The heavy-built hunter prowled closer to Norah's position, its head low to the ground as it followed the scent trail. "The smell is strange," it rumbled. "Old fear scent, memory scent." "Emberpaw does not lie," the leader replied firmly. "If she says apex walker, then we investigate. The old memories are not stories, Iron Teeth. They are warnings." Norah filed away the names, her scientific mind automatically cataloging information even while terror threatened to overwhelm her rational thought. The leader seemed to be called something that translated roughly to the scarred one, while the heavy hunter was Iron Teeth. The third, younger stalker remained unnamed in their conversation. "Tell me again about the night of the broken moon," Iron Teeth said, his massive head turning toward the pack leader. "Tell me why we should fear creatures half our size, with no claws and blunt teeth." The scarred leader's markings shifted to deep purple, a color pattern Norah had never seen documented. "Sit, young hunter, and listen to grandmother's memories." The 3 stalkers arranged themselves in the clearing, their massive forms creating a triangle with Norah's hiding spot uncomfortably close to the center. She pressed herself deeper into the fungi cluster, praying their bioluminescence would mask her heat signature. "3 generations passed," the leader began, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of oral tradition. "When the broken moon still fell in pieces from the sky, the apex walkers came to our hunting grounds. They built their stone hives in the sacred valleys and filled the air with the smoke of their machines." The younger stalker's markings flickered with impatience, but Iron Teeth leaned forward, clearly engrossed despite his earlier dismissal. "We thought them easy prey," the leader continued. "Soft, slow, weak. We stalked them through their stone hives, expecting them to run and scream as all prey does. Instead, they did something no prey had ever done before. They learned," Iron Teeth said softly, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. "They learned," the leader confirmed. "They studied our hunting patterns, our marking systems, our pack dynamics. They turned our own instincts against us. When we expected them to flee, they stood and fought. When we expected them to fight, they vanished like smoke." They became something we had never encountered before. Predators, the younger stalker whispered, its earlier dismissiveness replaced by fascination. Apex predators, the leader corrected. Not born to hunt, but made to hunt through will and cunning. They took our world and made it theirs, not through strength, but through adaptation. They became us, but better. Norah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien night air. The story they were telling matched no historical record she'd ever read. The colonial archives spoke of territorial disputes and resource conflicts, but nothing about humans systematically outmaneuvering an entire species of apex predators. The grandmother of my grandmother led the great hunt that night, the scarred leader continued. She thought to end the apex walkers with a single strike, to crush their largest hive while they slept. Instead, she found them waiting. His markings pulsed with colors that seemed to convey ancient grief and lingering terror. They had learned to see in our darkness. They had learned to move in our silence. They had learned to think like us, but faster, deeper, with connections we could not follow. The hunters became the hunted, and by dawn, half our pack was dead. And the other half? The younger stalker asked, though its voice suggested it already knew the answer. The other half learned fear, Iron Teeth said quietly. Fear of creatures that could become anything they needed to become. Fear that lives in our blood, passed down through the generations as a warning. The leader stood, his massive form casting shadows across the clearing. The apex walkers earned their place on this world through blood and cunning. We retreated to the deep forests and the high mountains, not in defeat, but in recognition. This world has two apex species now, and there is room for both, only so long as we remember what they are capable of. Norah's mind reeled as the implications hit her. The human colonies hadn't driven the stalkers to extinction or into hiding. They'd earned their respect through some kind of evolutionary arms race that had left both species fundamentally changed. But that raised a terrifying question. If the stalkers remembered humans as apex predators worthy of fear and respect, why were the colonies experiencing such peaceful coexistence? What had changed in the decades since the night of the broken moon? The answer came to her with dawning horror. The current generation of humans had no idea what their predecessors had done to earn that respect. They thought of the stalkers as dangerous wildlife to be avoided, not as fellow apex predators in a delicate territorial balance. That ignorance could get everyone killed. The sound of her equipment case sliding against the fungus cluster seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. All three stalkers turned toward her hiding spot, their marking patterns flaring bright with sudden alertness. "Well," Iron Teeth rumbled, his voice carrying dark amusement. "It seems we have an opportunity to test whether the new generation of apex walkers still deserves the title." The three massive stalkers rose to their feet with fluid grace that made Norah's blood freeze in her veins. There was no point in hiding anymore. Her equipment had betrayed her position, and these creatures possessed senses that could track a heartbeat through solid stone. She stood slowly, emerging from behind the fungus cluster with her hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. The stalkers formed a loose circle around her, their bioluminescent markings cycling through patterns she'd never seen before. Colors that seemed to convey curiosity, assessment, and something that might have been anticipation. "So," the scarred leader said, his voice carrying that same dark amusement Iron Teeth had displayed, "a young apex walker comes to study the old enemies. How nostalgic." Norah found her voice, though it came out smaller than she would have liked. "I'm just a researcher. I don't want any trouble. The younger stalker made a sound that might have been laughter. Trouble finds apex walkers, researcher. The question is whether you remember how to deal with it. I don't understand, Norah said, which was only partially true. She was beginning to understand far more than she wanted to. Moonhunter, as she'd decided to call the pack leader, began circling her with slow, deliberate steps. His remaining eyes never left her face, studying her with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. Your people have grown soft, he observed, comfortable in your stone hives, protected by your metal guardians. You've forgotten what made you apex. We never forgot, Norah said, surprised by the defensiveness in her own voice. We just chose to build instead of destroy. Building is not enough, Iron Teeth rumbled from her left. Any prey species can build. Vermin build colonies. Insects build hives. Building does not make you apex. The younger stalker had moved to her right, completing the triangle. Apex is earned through trial, through proving that when everything else is stripped away, you remain the hunter, not the hunted. Norah's scientific mind was screaming at her to document this interaction, to record the incredible linguistic capabilities these creatures were displaying. But her survival instincts were screaming louder, telling her that this was rapidly becoming less conversation and more evaluation. What kind of trial? She asked, though she suspected she already knew. Moonhunter's scarred muzzle pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing crystalline teeth that could shred Kevlar. The same trial your ancestors faced. Survive the hunt and prove you deserve to share this world. Fail and become food for our cubs. That's not exactly a fair test, Norah protested. You're evolved predators. I'm a xenobiologist with a sample collection kit. Fair? The younger stalker's markings flared bright orange with what was clearly amusement. Your ancestors didn't ask for fair. They took an unfair situation and made it work for them. That's what made them apex. Iron Teeth prowled closer, his massive bulk blocking one potential escape route. Fairness is a luxury for prey species. Predators adapt. Norah's mind raced through everything she knew about stalker behavior, hunting patterns, and pack dynamics. The academic knowledge felt pathetically inadequate in the face of 3 tons of evolved killing machine, but it was all she had. Fine, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. What are the rules? Moonhunter's markings shifted to deep purple again, that color she was starting to associate with approval or respect. Simple. You have until the 3rd moon reaches zenith to escape the Shadowmere Valley. We will hunt you. If you reach the boundary stones alive, you have proven yourself worthy of the apex title. And if I don't? Then your people will learn that their time of soft living has made them weak, Iron Teeth said matter-of-factly. And we will remind them what happens to prey that forgets its place. The threat was clear. This wasn't just about her survival. If she failed, these stalkers would view it as proof that humanity had lost its apex status. The delicate balance that had kept the peace for decades would shatter, and both species would pay the price. How long do I have? Norah asked. The younger stalker looked up at the 3 moons overhead. 2 hours, perhaps less. 2 hours to cross terrain she'd never seen, while being hunted by creatures that had evolved specifically to kill in these conditions. The smart play would be to refuse, to demand they contact the research station, to insist on diplomatic solutions. But as she looked into Moonhunter's remaining eyes, she realized that refusing wasn't an option. This was bigger than academic research or colonial politics. This was about proving that humans still deserved their place in the galaxy's apex hierarchy. "I accept," she said. The three stalkers stepped back, giving her room to move. Moonhunter's scarred head tilted in what might have been a bow of acknowledgement. "The hunt begins when we howl," he said. "Use the time wisely, young apex walker. Your ancestors would have." Norah didn't wait for further explanation. She grabbed her emergency pack and took off running toward the forest edge, her mind already working through possibilities. She had maybe 30 seconds before they started tracking her, and she needed every advantage she could create. The crystal trees provided some cover, but she knew the stalkers could see heat signatures and track scent trails that were hours old. Hiding wasn't an option. Neither was outrunning them in a straight chase. She needed to think like a predator, not prey. Behind her, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest. Then another. Then a third, harmonizing in frequencies that seemed to resonate in her bones. The hunt had begun. Norah reached into her pack and pulled out her emergency flare gun. Not much of a weapon against creatures that size, but the phosphorus charge burned hot enough to disrupt thermal imaging. She fired it into a cluster of fungi behind her, creating a bright heat signature that would hopefully confuse their tracking. Then she did something that went against every human instinct. She doubled back toward the clearing. The stalkers would expect her to run straight for the boundary, putting maximum distance between herself and them. Instead, she circled around their starting position, using their own hunting ground against them. If they were tracking her scent, they'd follow the false trail she'd left, while she approached from an unexpected angle. She could hear them moving through the forest, their coordination perfect despite the darkness. They were using pack hunting tactics, driving her toward prepared ambush points. Exactly what any sensible prey would expect. But Norah wasn't prey. She was human, and humans had earned their apex status by refusing to be sensible. She climbed. The crystal trees were sharp and unforgiving, but they were also tall enough to provide a completely different perspective on the terrain. From 30 feet up, she could see the stalkers moving through the forest below, their bioluminescent markings giving away their positions. More importantly, she could see their pattern. They were herding her toward a narrow canyon that would funnel her into a killing zone. Classic pack predator behavior, and exactly what she would have done in their position. The problem was that they expected her to stay on the ground. Norah began moving through the tree canopy, using her smaller size and human agility to navigate branches that wouldn't support a stalker's weight. It was slower than running, but it kept her above their scent trails and out of their direct line of sight. Below her, she heard Iron Teeth growl in frustration. The scent trail ends at the burning fungi. She's covering her tracks. "No," Moonhunter's voice carried clearly through the still air. "She's thinking like Apex. Spread out. Check the trees." Norah cursed under her breath. Of course the pack leader would figure it out. She was running out of time and tricks, and she still had over a mile to go before reaching the boundary stones. That's when she remembered her xenobiology training and the unique properties of this world's ecosystem. The crystal trees weren't just decorative. They were part of a complex electromagnetic network that the planet's wildlife used for navigation and communication. She pulled out her portable scanner and began adjusting its frequency output. If she could tap into that network, she might be able to do something that would give even experienced apex predators pause. The scanner's modified signal pulse rippled through the crystal tree network, creating a cascade of electromagnetic feedback that lit up the entire forest canopy. Every crystal tree for miles began pulsing in synchronized patterns, their bioluminescence creating a light show that could be seen from orbit. More importantly, it overloaded the stalker's electromagnetic senses. the same organs they used to track prey through electrical fields and nervous system activity. Below her, all three stalkers roared in pain and confusion as their hunting senses were suddenly flooded with conflicting signals. They stumbled, shaking their massive heads as they tried to clear their sensory overload. Norah didn't waste the opportunity. She dropped from the tree canopy and ran for the boundary stones, pushing her human endurance to its absolute limit. Her lungs burned and her legs screamed in protest, but she kept running. Behind her, she could hear the stalkers recovering, their angry roars echoing through the electromagnetic chaos she'd created. They would be coming after her now with everything they had, all pretense of a measured hunt abandoned. But she could see the boundary stones ahead, ancient markers that delineated the edge of stalker territory. Just a few hundred more yards, and she would prove that humans still deserved their apex status. That's when Moonhunter appeared directly in front of her, having somehow circled around during her desperate sprint. His scarred form blocked the path to the boundary stones, and his markings blazed with colors she'd never seen before. "Clever," he rumbled, his voice carrying grudging admiration. "Your ancestors would have approved, but cleverness alone does not make you apex." Norah skidded to a halt, her mind racing through options. She was exhausted, outmatched, and out of tricks, but she wasn't out of ideas. "You're right," she said, straightening up despite her burning lungs. "Cleverness doesn't make you apex, but this does." She pulled out her emergency beacon and activated its distress signal. Within seconds, the night sky lit up with the engines of incoming rescue ships, their searchlights painting the forest in harsh white light. Moonhunter's eyes widened as armed colonial defense forces began rappelling from the hovering craft, their weapons trained on him. The old stalker could have killed Norah before they reached the ground, but he didn't move. Instead, he began to laugh, a sound like rocks grinding together that somehow conveyed genuine respect. "Pack loyalty," he said, his markings shifting to that deep purple of approval. "You called your pack for support when faced with superior force. Very apex, very human." The boundary stones were only 50 yards away, well within reach now that backup had arrived. But Norah found herself looking back at the scarred stalker who had tested her so thoroughly. "The trial isn't over," she said. "I still need to reach the boundary." Moonhunter stepped aside, clearing the path. "The trial was never about reaching a line of stones, young apex walker. It was about proving you remember what made your people worthy of respect." As Norah walked the final distance to the boundary markers, she realized that something fundamental had changed, not just in her understanding of human-stalker relations, but in how she saw herself and her species. They weren't just another colony species trying to carve out a living on an alien world. They were apex predators who had earned their place through blood, cunning, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. And now, it was her job to make sure her people remembered that. The rescue ships settled into the clearing with military precision, their engines kicking up clouds of crystalline dust that sparkled in the artificial light. Norah watched from behind the boundary stones as a full tactical team emerged, weapons at the ready, their faces grim behind tactical visors. She recognized the lead figure immediately. Commander Rodriguez, head of colonial defense for the Epsilon Ridge sector. "Dr. Blackthorne," Rodriguez called out, his voice amplified by his suit's external speakers. "Are you injured? Do you require immediate medical attention?" "I'm fine," Norah replied, though she was anything but. Her legs felt like they were made of overcooked pasta. Her lungs burned from the sprint through alien atmosphere, and her entire worldview had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt in the span of a few hours. She looked back at Moonhunter, who remained motionless where she'd left him. The other two stalkers had emerged from the forest and flanked their pack leader, but none of them showed any signs of aggression toward the armed humans. If anything, they seemed pleased. "Sir," one of the tactical team members reported, "we have 3 adult Ravenclaw stalkers in the open. Recommend immediate containment protocols." "Belay that order," Norah said quickly, stepping forward. "They're not a threat. This was a misunderstanding." Rodriguez's helmet turned toward her, and she could practically feel his incredulous stare through the visor. "Doctor, those creatures are listed as extreme danger. Protocol requires—" "Protocol doesn't cover this situation, Commander," Norah interrupted. "These stalkers can speak. They have language, culture, and historical memory going back generations. Everything we thought we knew about them is wrong." The tactical team exchanged glances, their weapons still trained on the 3 massive predators. Rodriguez approached the boundary stones, his movements careful and controlled. "Doctor, I think the stress of being stranded may have caused some hallucinations." "We do not need your protection, Metal Walker," Moonhunter said clearly, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Your pack sister has proven herself worthy of the Apex title. The trial is complete." The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez's weapon lowered slightly, and Norah could see his jaw working behind his visor as he tried to process what he'd just heard. "Sweet mother of—" one of the tactical team started to say before Rodriguez cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Dr. Blackthorne," Rodriguez said slowly, "perhaps you could explain what exactly happened here?" Norah looked between the human soldiers and the stalker pack, suddenly aware that she was standing at the center of a moment that would reshape everything both species thought they knew about each other. "It's complicated," she began. "The short version is that humanity and the stalkers have a shared history that nobody talks about anymore. The stalkers remember it as genetic memory passed down through generations. We've apparently forgotten it entirely." "What kind of shared history?" Rodriguez asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Iron Teeth stepped forward, his massive bulk making the armed humans unconsciously shift their positions. "The night of the broken moon," he rumbled, "when your people earned the right to be called apex predators alongside us." "That was nearly 4 decades ago," Rodriguez said, "before the current colonial administration, before most of the current settlements. The records from that period are classified beyond my clearance level." "Because your leaders knew what your people had become," the younger stalker added, "and they feared what would happen if the galaxy learned that humans could outhunt species that had evolved specifically to kill." Norah felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. "The peaceful coexistence between our species isn't because we're harmless neighbors. It's because we're both apex predators who've agreed to share territory." "But that agreement only works," Moonhunter said, his scarred muzzle turning toward the human soldiers, "if both species remember what they are. Your people have grown soft, comfortable. You've forgotten the strength that earned you respect." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, his tactical computer no doubt recording everything for later analysis. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone entirely. "Are you saying that the current peace is unstable?" "Peace built on forgotten strength is no peace at all," Iron Teeth replied. "It is merely a pause before inevitable conflict." The implications hit Norah like a physical blow. The colonial government had been operating under the assumption that the stalkers were simply dangerous wildlife that had learned to avoid human settlements. But if the stalkers viewed humans as fellow apex predators who had gone soft, then the current détente was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Worse, if other stalker packs decided to test whether humans still deserved their apex status, The results could be catastrophic for both species. There have to be records, Norah said. Somewhere in the colonial archives, there has to be documentation of what really happened during the night of the broken moon. Classified doesn't begin to cover it, Rodriguez replied grimly. Those files are buried so deep that most people in the EPE, colonial government, don't even know they exist. The official story is that early territorial disputes were resolved through diplomatic negotiations. The younger stalker made that grinding sound that passed for laughter among their species. Diplomatic negotiations. Is that what you call it when your people learn to hunt us with the same efficiency we used to hunt your ancestors? What exactly did happen? Norah asked, turning back to Moonhunter. The old stalker's markings shifted through deep purples and blues as he accessed what he'd called grandmother's memories. Your people were dying. Our packs had claimed the most fertile valleys, the best hunting grounds. We saw humans as just another prey species to be managed. But humans don't manage well, Iron Teeth added with something that might have been respect. 300 of your people were trapped in what you now call Settlement Valley, Moonhunter continued. 5 stalker packs, nearly 200 hunters, had surrounded them. It should have been a simple hunt. Instead, it became a lesson in why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, the younger stalker said. Rodriguez had moved closer, his tactical team maintaining a defensive perimeter, but no longer treating the stalkers as immediate threats. What happened to those 300 people? They did what no prey species had ever done before, Moonhunter explained. They studied us, not just our hunting patterns or our pack dynamics, but our psychology, our instincts, our evolutionary programming. Then they used that knowledge to turn us into prey. The humans in Settlement Valley spent 3 days learning everything they could about stalker behavior, Iron Teeth continued. They mapped our territorial markers, analyzed our communication patterns, identified our pack hierarchies. Then they systematically began dismantling our hunting strategies, the younger stalker added. They set traps that exploited our pack instincts. They used our own marking systems to create false territorial boundaries that confused our navigation. They turned our strength against us. Norah felt a chill as she began to understand the scope of what had happened. They didn't just fight back. They out-evolved you in real time. Exactly, Moonhunter said, his scarred head nodding in approval. By the end of the 4th day, we weren't hunting humans anymore. They were hunting us. The final engagement lasted 18 hours, Iron Teeth recalled. Humans using tactics we had never seen, weapons we had never imagined, strategies that seemed to anticipate our every move. When dawn broke, half our hunters were dead, and the other half had learned a new kind of fear. Fear of being outapexed by creatures we had dismissed as prey, the younger stalker concluded. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. So the current peace treaties are not treaties between predator and prey, Moonhunter corrected. They are agreements between 2 apex species to share hunting grounds without unnecessary conflict. But that only works if both species remember their nature, Iron Teeth emphasized. Your people have grown comfortable. They build walls instead of learning to hunt. They rely on machines instead of developing instincts. And if we've forgotten how to be apex predators? Norah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Then the galaxy will remind you, the younger stalker said simply. Other species have been watching, waiting to see if humans still deserve their reputation. If word spreads that you have grown weak. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Norah looked around at the tactical team, trained soldiers who represented the best of human military capability. But military training was different from the kind of adaptive lethality that had earned humanity its apex status. "What would it take," she asked, "to prove that humans still deserve the title?" Moonhunter's markings shifted to that deep purple of approval. "Individual trials, like the one you just completed. Proof that your people can still adapt, still hunt, still outthink species that have evolved specifically to kill." "But more than that," Iron Teeth added, "your people need to remember what they are. Apex predators don't hide behind walls and machines. They face challenges directly and overcome them through superior adaptation." Rodriguez stepped forward, his posture shifting subtly from defensive to something more collaborative. "Are you suggesting some kind of cultural exchange program?" "We are suggesting that both our species need to remember the lessons of the Night of the Broken Moon," the younger Stalker replied. "Humans and Stalkers are both apex predators. When we work together, we are stronger than either species alone. And when we forget that," Moonhunter added gravely, "we become vulnerable to species that have not forgotten what they are." The implication was clear. Humanity's reputation as an apex species had spread throughout the galaxy. But that reputation was based on actions taken decades ago by people who were now mostly dead or retired. If the current generation couldn't prove they were worthy of that reputation, other species might decide to test human defenses. "I need to contact Colonial Command," Rodriguez said finally. "This conversation needs to happen at levels far above my authority." "And I need to document everything," Norah added. "The scientific community needs to understand what we're really dealing with here." Moonhunter stood, his massive form casting long shadows in the artificial light from the rescue ships. "The young apex walker has proven herself worthy," he said formally. "She faced the trial with courage and completed it through cunning and pack loyalty. Her people should be proud." "But this is only the beginning," Iron Teeth warned. "Other Stalker packs are watching. Other species are waiting. Humans must prove, again and again, that they deserve their place among the apex predators of the galaxy." "And if we can't?" Rodriguez asked. The three Stalkers exchanged glances, their markings cycling through colors that conveyed concepts Norah was only beginning to understand. "Then the galaxy will find new apex predators," the younger Stalker said simply, "and humans will learn what it means to be prey." As the rescue ships prepared for departure, Norah found herself looking back at the three massive creatures who had fundamentally changed her understanding of humanity's place in the universe. They weren't just dangerous wildlife to be avoided or managed. They were fellow apex predators who served as a reminder of what humans could become when survival was on the line. The peaceful coexistence between the species wasn't a sign of successful diplomacy. It was a testament to mutual respect between predators who recognized each other's lethality. But that respect had to be continuously earned. And as Norah climbed aboard the rescue ship, she realized that her real work was just beginning. Humanity needed to remember what it meant to be apex. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see if humans still deserved their fearsome reputation. The cubs had smelled her blood and whispered, "That's apex," in recognition and respect. Now it was up to her generation to prove that recognition was still warranted. Because if they couldn't, the whisper would change from respect to eulogy, and humanity would learn too late what they had allowed themselves to forget. The rescue ship lifted off into the night sky, carrying Norah back toward a civilization that had no idea how close it had come to losing everything that made it human.